Jrafel's Day, the goddess of joy, the lady of delight, romance and enduring love, the goddess of devotion and understanding. Back at their campus apartment, Tom rooted through his collection of movies. His suit was a thing to behold. For a wonder, even Badin was pleased. The suit looked like a twilight sky, a solid, matte black save for glossy patches of midnight blue. The raised collar flared around his jawline, while a gossamer cloud wound over his left shoulder. It was sleek. For Shilvanti fashion, it was a work of art. Even for human tastes, it was pretty damned cool. The whole thing looked like something worn down a catwalk, but this was Shill. And for a men's suit? Badin still thought it was understated for Jrafel's Day, but you couldn't please everyone. His only nod to Irv was the minute eagle set against the cloud. If he couldn't wear his old uniform, he could still show the eagle. Subtle though it might be, that wasn't why it was there. Something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue. The rhyme was a charm for good luck and seemed appropriate, much like the movie he was searching for. Nothing right popped out at him, but a whole lot of wrong had. Something would hit him, it just hadn't yet. Something new, something blue. The ensemble was new, and there was midnight blue on the jacket. His lost wife would have greeted the new world of aliens with a sense of wonder. She'd always wanted to be Scully, and would have fared better than he had. He'd struck out in his grief, and then, once the futility of it set in, he'd buried himself. There was no knowing what Claire would have done, but not that. Had she lived, he'd still be on Earth right now. In the evening, they sit out on the deck. Him watching the deer, her watching for eagles. The eagle was for Claire. He felt no melancholy at the choice, no pangs of regret. Being yourself meant the whole of you, including the people who shaped your life. The choice felt appropriate, particularly now. He'd suggested pictures the day before. Now, pictures of Claire and Jess hung beside Miv and Leia's lost husband and co-wife, Chanda and Amit. The girls roped in Lani, asking about her family, while sharing tales of their former husband and wife. That was how it ought to be, and their gratitude had made him feel thoughtless. Miv and Leia seldom asked about Claire or Jess, and in fairness, he'd said less. Solani knew about them, but surely that wasn't the same. Chandra and Amit were alive in their thoughts, and stories brought their loved ones to life, and Lani listened attentively, learning about the women she was marrying. He tried his best to follow their example, but failed. His silence had turned Claire and Jess into ghosts, but he'd been unable to reconcile his feelings before now. It had taken years to give up the pain, but he'd been ready to reach out when Miv crossed his path. If they had a whirlwind romance, it had been genuine. He had wanted to marry Miv, and Leia, with her earthly sense of humour, had been part of the deal. If she'd been initially reluctant, her marriage to Miv had been her own form of isolation. He'd been the intruder, yet she'd accepted him, and something wonderful had come of it. When Solani entered their lives, Miv and Leia had looked her up and down, considered the situation, then dove straight in. They surfaced after some pragmatic discussion, but Miv and Leia had settled on Lani as marriage material. It was very Shilvanti, and made picking out a movie a real pain in the ass. Shilvanti. Heck, none of the other intelligent species did horror movies. It was the lack of adrenaline. They loved action films, but horror was all gruesome or no frills. All of the former with none of the latter was not inviting. You could punch up a date by taking someone to an exciting event, an action movie, a good party, anything fun, because the thrill of the event became associated with you. It wasn't just a case of showing someone a good time, as being the good time. With adrenaline, that opened a world of options. Without adrenaline, the point of view got skewed. Horror flicks were out. Mind you, Claire had loved The Silence of the Lambs, but then she had also loved The X-Files. Scully had been her spirit guide. Aliens Landing would have been her forte. A movie about a woman in the FBI? She was all in. Miv would have enjoyed the intellectual parts, picking through the case to solve the mystery. The detective work would appeal to her, and the triumph of good over evil was very, very Jrafel. The loyal and competent agent winning in the end? It was hard to go wrong there. A woman from the poor side of the tracks would appeal to Shalea. She taught in Kriantori, the poor part of the city. For Shalea, the notion of Clarice working her way up through the FBI would probably be satisfying. For Solani, the action would probably be a good hook. She was that kind of girl all over, and an action film, sans horror, was not a bad choice. But not tonight. It wasn't strictly a horror movie, though it got the adrenaline going, but it was horrible in the most literal sense. Hannibal Lecter was the stuff of nightmares, and what it might say about humanity. Note to self, do not ever show this to Zenshiki. Somehow the Pezrin girl had become a surrogate daughter in her own right, alongside his adopted daughter, Desi. He wasn't certain how it worked, or what Zenshiki's actual parents thought about the arrangement. They had set it up and gone silent afterwards. His other option had been starring as the main course. She was there to learn from him and, in the full course of time, to take his name. I need to spend time thinking about what I'm teaching them outside the classroom. But not Hannibal Lecter. Zenshiki wasn't trying to eat him currently, but she's certainly given it her best shot. Right now, he didn't want to consider a future where he was richly eaten with some fava beans and a nice Chianti. Solani didn't want a honeymoon until she was fully healed, and she'd been adamant about spending tonight at home. So, a movie night. Cuddling up with the three of them was definitely in order, particularly Lani, considering. It would be good, but not watching The Silence of the Lambs. He'd cook something nice, maybe a pizza, no kale. He'd experimented with it once before since Bodin had it in storage. Miv and Leia looked at him like he shot the cat. Jrafel hated kale, which was fine. He hated kale too. Kale pizza? That was real horror for you. Still, the notion of fear merited some thought. Lacking adrenaline, the races of the galaxy, the ones he'd heard of at least, still had a sense of it, but simply lacked the fight or flight reaction provided by adrenaline. He'd seen it in action. Their sense of fight or flight was situational, not visceral, as was their sense of other emotions, which possibly said a great deal about Miv, Leia, and Lani. They decided how they felt and didn't hold back. There was a sense of permanence to their choices that was, well, alien. They just went all in. Do or do not, there is no try. Tom exhaled and shook his head, setting down his omnipad. Wedding day jitters? Well, he didn't have any. No matter what craziness happened, it was all good. A traditional Jrafel wedding should keep any surprises to manageable levels. All you had to do was go along for the ride. Something old and something borrowed? He'd made up his mind to wear the katana. It had been tucked away for far too long, and showing it off was a personal choice. It was certainly old, and it felt borrowed, like something held in trust. As the weapon that had beheaded an admiral, it would shock the hell out of the Jrafel. And so what? It's my big day too. The sword deserved to be on display, not hidden in the back of his closet. Solani was wearing her uniform. He'd opted not to wear his, and he was damn well not wearing the yeoman's outfit. The sword felt like a compromise, and the sash around his jacket was perfect. By Shorvanti standards, wearing it wasn't remotely masculine, but Lani was getting the whole package. Besides, it was going to be a small service. He got back to flicking through the movies. Somehow only the horror films popped out at him. It wasn't like he enjoyed horror flicks, and his collection had no slashers. No Halloween, It, or Hellraiser. But Constantine, The Crow, The Devil's Advocate. Situationally, they evoked horror, but they were far more than just slasher films. Cripes. I think humanity messed itself up. I know I'm damaged goods. I hope Solani isn't making a mistake. She was the right woman for Miv and Leia, and she felt right to him. He didn't doubt his feelings and was looking forward to the wedding. More than that, he wanted to share his life with them all and... There was a knock on the door, and he turned. Yes? Desi peeked around the corner. Father, it's Sinchiki and I. Is it all right if we come in? Sure, I'm decent. He turned the Omnipad face down, burying Anthony Hopkins. What's up? We're here to get you to the cathedral. Desi stepped in, while Zinchiki closed the door behind them. Dressed for the ceremony, Desi looked lovely in a blue and cream bolero jacket with silver stitching, while Zinchiki wore a belted wrap the colour of burnished copper. The dinner set tucked into her belt looked uncomfortably sharp. You mentioned not being seen before the wedding. Zinchiki's asaic flickered once. I thought you might require protection. Oh, that's just an old human tradition. I shouldn't have mentioned it. It's mostly for the bride and groom to finally see each other at the altar, that sort of thing. Tom considered the irony of his suit. Bodin says I'll look stunning, if a bit somber for Jrafel's day. It's very nice. Desi clasped her hands behind her back and looked at it appreciatively. You're wearing flowers in your hair? It's a wreath. Bodin said it's traditional for weddings with more than one wife. Tom looked suspiciously at the garland on the bed. Bodin assured him that it was all very symbolic, the choice of flowers indicating how many wives he had, who he was marrying, and other obscure details. The symbolism ran deep, so he rolled with it. Sure, it's coming off for the reception, but I'll wear it during the wedding. Are you excited? Desi wore her usual grin. I mean, our wedding on Jrafel's day is special. The campus cathedral is probably the only temple that isn't jammed today. Yeah, there's that. He shrugged, looking at the flowers with a certain diffidence. Virtue of school being out, isn't it? Yes. Desi cocked her head to one side. Is everything all right? I mean, it's not like I expected you to be a blushing groom, but you don't seem excited. I was getting wrapped up in my thoughts. I'm hoping I'm the right guy for Solani, and it got me thinking. Why wouldn't you be? Zinchiki's head tilted a bit more, showing her curiosity. Her asaic said the rest. And there it is, no fight or flight, just straightforward acceptance from both of them. Just being human, I suppose. I was thinking about how different this will be. Traditional Shorvanti wedding, you know. It's got me a little introspective, you know. There are times I don't feel like I deserve the good things that have come to me. Well, Solani accepts you, so it can't be too bad. Desi clasped her hands behind her, like she was answering in class. And you're good to us. A lot of us would have been killed without you, so I don't see why you wouldn't deserve things. Anyway, mums know that you'll all be good together. Mums. Plural. Miv and Leia were now her mums, and their verdict on the matter had settled things in Desi's mind. It was a different perspective, but it wasn't a bad one. I'm sure we will. Maybe it's something human, and maybe it isn't. I look at Zach and Jennifer McClendon and have to wonder. Tom realised he'd hunched up without knowing why. It felt defensive, so he rolled his shoulders and sat down. We just finished the Earth's First World War in class, right? I don't see the connection. Shinshiki had crossed over to examine his suit. Will this be a metaphor? Not as such. He leaned forward to look at the ensemble. People would be arriving, and he needed to get to the cathedral and dress. It occurred to me that Shorvanti and Pezrin's stories are about duty and destiny. It had taken some effort to find Pezrin's stories, but big dinners were uncomfortably prominent. Human stories are about action and violence. We weren't that way before the First War, but things kept getting worse. By the time the Imperium found us. Desi turned back from the suit to look at him. Her head still cocked slightly. The lost generation you told us about? It seems humans are good at violence, but we inured ourselves to it. Turned to violence to prevent violence, but it cost a part of ourselves. Made it a fetish. I don't know if it's something we turned ourselves into or who we've always been. He huffed in resignation. Honestly, I was thinking about what I offer you and Shinshiki. What I offer Miv, Leia, and Solani. I'm not having second thoughts, but it got me thinking about the past. Desi regarded him, though she stopped canting her head. You don't talk very much of your family, father. You should be happy. It's Jrafel's day. Would you like to talk about it? I'll make you both a promise. Someday soon we'll sit down and I'll answer your questions, if you'd like. I'd like that very much, Desi nodded. I'd like to hear about Jessica. I'm fine with more violence, Shinshiki said tonelessly, but tales of family are honourable. I've only said her name how many times? And she remembered. Desi's expression was caring, while Shinshiki's was inscrutable, but their concern was humbling. His eyes were wet, and he rubbed away a tear, sniffed once and sat back, regarding his very violet daughter and his very violent... Well, whatever she was important. Today was so much more than he would have imagined. It's hard to let go sometimes. You go to the weddings and the funerals, you say goodbye, you learn to grieve. Eventually you get on with your life, Tom said carefully, passing out his thoughts. And sometimes the people who aren't there will hit you like a hammer to the heart. But you're alive and you remember to live. I suppose if it lasted forever, life wouldn't be so worth treasuring. Desi gave him a smile that was hesitant but wry. That sounds more like an old person to young person thing than a human thing. Nothing wrong with that. Tom stretched once and stood up, picked up his omnipad. The movie menu paraded down the screen and he made a selection. Pleasantville, because there is no right house, there is no right car. Life is about being the right you. Tom got to his feet, picking up the bags with the suit and katana. Let's do this. Avi considered her husband as he drove. Tom Steinberg, former patient, serial killer, and rhino keeper, though the last two were nearly synonymous. Not that it felt like she'd given up her vocation as a therapist. Life with Tom tended to keep her in practice. It wasn't easy for an Adixie to love a human, but marrying him had felt like the right idea at the time. She hadn't looked back, but he needed minding. Constantly. Really, it was situational. For all of his many virtues, he was admirably dangerous despite the blunt teeth, Tom could lose focus over the most obscure and trivial things. Whenever something triggered his innate sense of right and wrong, he grew obsessive, compelled to exact redress for the slight, real or imagined. Frequently he had no sense of proportion, and she worried about the day when he lost any sense of caution. She had wondered if his compulsions were a human characteristic, but no. Tom's friend and employer, Prince Adam, had been the driving force in sending Tom for help. Drug therapy was out of the question. The demons that drove her husband were too old and ran too deep, but at least they could be channeled.
Tom, I know you want to see the other humans, but this is a Shovanti ceremony and...
She saw his expression starting to cloud over.
From what you've told me, he chose this. I know you don't want to spoil his day, and besides, I need you to watch the children with me.
Ma'am, Ari wailed, with Amy looking ready to take up the challenge.
Because the two of you will be watching your brother.
A petulant cloud stole over their son.
Is this going to be boring? I bet it's going to be boring. This is something for us, so I expect you three to behave. You want your father to look good in front of the other humans, don't you? I could have left you watching Shanky. Yeah, the pups cheered. Stop that. You three can't sit around all day watching your father's instructional videos, and it's time for you to behave in polite company. Be good in the ceremony, and we'll have dinner at the reception. Yes, ma'am.
The girls settled into their seats, looking innocent. It was a good act. Tom licked his lips. Love, you know Silence of the Lambs isn't a how-to. She gave him a thoughtful look and let him wonder. It was good for him.
What if they don't have any good food?
Dex pouted, crossing his arms the way Tom did when he got upset.
Dad says we can't even have brownies.
Those are Dad's special brownies. They're my gift, Tom said patiently, mussing Dex's hair gently.
Dad, stop it,
Dex wailed. Don't argue with your mum, kids, and she's right. I want to talk to Rabbi Solomon while we're here, Tom said. But hey, tell you what, if you behave the whole time, we'll stop by Awfully Good for some frozen chumsticks on the way home. The girls bounced up in their seats.
Ow, can we get tripe? I don't want tripe.
Dex gnashed his teeth, petulantly.
And how long's the whole time, Mum? I love my son, but I swear he needs to marry a lawyer.
Avie closed her inner eyelids and breathed. Still, it was good for her husband. It kept him focused, and Tom minding the kids was the best way to mind Tom.
I want a scoop of liver and kidney with entrails.
That's... Tom frowned as they rounded the curve, and the campus cathedral came into view, set into the hillside. I knew the human folks were coming from the mission, but damn!
Tom, that's not a small crowd.
Kalis didn't like crowds, but the money on display as women entered the temple was tempting, even toothsome.
That was Zinshiki, Patviri announced as she tucked away her omnipad. They're on their way. You're sure that was Zinshiki?
Raikisha's aside only flickered into third-degree curiosity.
Who else would it be? Patviri hissed with exasperation. You two weren't fighting, Raikishi remarked nonchalantly, studying the crowd. I wasn't entirely sure. And why are we waiting outside? Hissed Kalis.
Her stomach rumbled with thoughts of the reception buffet and passed for dessert.
Zenshiki is bringing her Hakakt to the temple. I want to meet my Hakakt here, and neither of you is sneaking off to see past until all four of us are together, Patviri rumbled.
But her Asaiak waved serenely, despite the chill.
But I have my gift.
Raikishi's voice was monotone, but her Asaiak did a curl and flip of second-degree annoyance.
I got him a multipass. What do you mean?
Kalis blinked, and let the tip of her Asaiak flick in second-degree amusement, mixed with third-degree confusion. It wasn't as if you did all your business through an omnipad.
He's gonna have his own multipass. Of course he will. It's Lilu's multipass. Raikishi rocked on the balls of her feet and grinned like she'd found the wishbone. I snagged it from her bedroom before the thing with the suit. We don't talk about that, ever.
Kalis blinked twice. The thing would surely be cancelled by now, but as trophies went, it was good.
And half of that's mine,
she said, stiffening her Asiac defiantly.
Half the cash is yours. You didn't even see this,
Raikishi said primly.
This is a perfectly good... Would you two stop?
Pat Veery arched.
Fun now, date later. Remember to smile.
Trophies were fun. Still, Kalis found herself following Pat Veery's gaze to the large party approaching the temple. The crowds moving inside numbered in the hundreds, but the mixture of Shulvanti and humans was impossible to mix. Her Asiac threatened to flicker in third-degree uncertainty, but she followed her sister's lead as Pat Veery stepped forward.
Pardon, are you the Dasari and McClendon party?
I am Lady Dasari, and who might you young women be?
The woman said loftily as she stepped forward, obviously the matriarch. Kalis didn't know what Pat Veery was doing, but she smiled anyway, showing least fang.
I'm Pat Veery. These are my sisters, Raikishi and Kalis. Our sister Zinshiki and her Hakat Rakwa, Deshin, are escorting Mr. Warwick to the temple. We were asked to make sure you arrived and show you to your seats.
Well, that's very thoughtful, and just look at the crowd. I had no idea. Girls, now this is how a lady is properly celebrated.
Shulvanti women were taller than Pezrin, but the woman tilted her head back to gaze over the crowd. The woman's eyes flickered over the parade of wealth on display, though being Shulvanti, she was probably not planning a theft. Typical. Still, though, there was some uncertainty in her voice.
Well, this is all very unexpected. Girls, keep a close eye on your men. You said you're going to show us to our seats?
Yes, lady, Pat Veery said calmly. In the first and second row, mixed in with the mothers of the brides.
Excuse me, lady, coming through. We have to get set up. A troop of newscasters pushed past, followed by wandering packs of camerawomen. They stalled when they saw the humans. Oh, hey, we got some humans here. Pardon, sir, can we get a statement? Are you with the groom? Are you going to do anything human during the reception? The barrage of questions grew to a clamour as their retinue began taping. The matriarch wasn't having it, drawing herself up like a gathering storm.
Now, look here. You're imposing on our men, and it's unseemly.
Kalis watched as the newswomen facing the matriarch paled, going silent. It was an impressive display, though it wasn't directed at her so much as the party behind them.
Make way for Her Highness, Duchess de Seran, and her husband, Prince Larao Tassu.
Kalis had no respect for Shulvanti nobility unless it was payday, but the Shulvanti had an innate respect for Shulvanti nobility. The Dasari woman's mouth fell open before clamping it shut, and she spun around like a roast on a rotisserie.
If she had an Asiac, it would be standing on end.
Still, the effect was informative.
Do excuse my seneschal. She gets so exuberant, and such a crowd.
The Shulvanti woman was surely the Duchess. A literal fortune in glowstones cascaded down her dress.
But where are my manners? Please allow me to introduce my husband, Lural. Forgive us, but did we overhear that you're with the groom?
The man at her side stepped forward, offering a warm smile. It's such a lovely morning for Jrafel's day wedding. Kalis practically drooled. If the Duchess's gems could purchase 3 home ships, her mates could have purchased 10. It was like looking at the galaxy's most expensive buffet.
My husband is such a sentimentalist for a wedding, but who are these charming gentlemen you're with? 6 of them, no less. But for my husband, I'd certainly be jealous. I'm Lady Phrysis Desari, Your Highness, Lady of Earth. These are close friends of my family and the groom, Your Highnesses.
The question seemed to galvanize the Desari matriarch.
This is Lady McClendon and her family. Her husband, Zachariah, her son Levi and his wives, Riala and Melody, along with their children, Cassandra and Joshua, her son Eli and her daughter Hannah. And these are my co-wives, Akita, Miara and Nixie, and our children, Trixis, Yumina, Solana, and Lagos. Most of all, I'd like to present my husband, Brelak, and my cousin...
Berdine, where have you been hiding? Kalis blinked and stared. Was it? It was.
The one that got away.
Kalis felt her stomach rumble again.
She looks different, awakened and tied. Still tasty, though. Dark mother, I want to eat someone.
We must catch up. We missed you once you left the Happy Sisters. But listen to me, gossiping on. I've always considered it the height of good manners to arrive on time, Lady Desari, and you're with the wedding couple. If you'll precede us, I trust we'll speak again at the reception.
The Duchess cocked her head ever so slightly. Despite looking stunned, the matriarch got the hint. She caught Solana's eye and remembered to smile just for her. The girl paled. Kalis licked her lips.
You are dinner.
Tom peered out the window of the on-the-cab. It had seemed like a frivolous expense not to walk on a crisp morning, but as they drew near... I can see it now. Desi was sitting in back, keeping an eye on his suit, while Zenshiki guarded his sword.
Father, are you all right? What is it?
There are camera crews. Tom sputtered at the throng around the cathedral. Why? Why are there camera crews?
The filming inside will be Nessa and Lark. They won't be allowed in.
Desi laid a hand on his arm, pulling him back into his seat.
It's fine.
I'm having an epiphany. A vision, Tom whispered. Despite pulling up to a side entrance, a camera crew was already running their way. I'm going to kill Jama. Are your priests going to be topless dancers? Of all the nerve. Tom stepped to the edge of the dais and breathed. It wasn't a question to share with Monsignor Basilio. He'd grown used to the occasional cultural misunderstanding, including the salacious ones, but there were limits. They call me Long Tom. Abandon all hope, foolish mortals. Our campus legal staff are a Dixie, and we're not afraid to use them. The Academy Cathedral was... well, he'd seen it at a distance, and there were regular services, but never felt the inclination to go inside. That had been a mistake. The building hung low on the horizon, embedded against a hill. From the outside, it was obscured by a thick stand of trees, and aside from the parking facilities, there wasn't much to be seen. It looked very much like the amphitheatre down by the beach, but if the outside was unremarkable, the same could not be said for the interior. Framed like a cavern grotto, the cathedral was stunning. The interior was vast. That was no surprise, as it had been made to seat to the needs of the students, the staff, and visiting family. Shovanti tended to be devout, and when school was in session, there was no small number of people. But school was out for the holiday. He had expected the ceremony to be dwarfed by the cathedral, though inviting Basilio and the mission priests seemed like a good move. It would let them experience a service, however small. And now plans had hit reality. He'd planned for a modest crowd. Modest? The Desaris, the McClendons, Tom Steinberg and his family, Shalea's mothers, the clergy from the mission, escorted by women from the palace. They sat beside the priests, glaring daggers at anyone who glanced their way. And that was where his expectations had ended. Instead, the cathedral was awash with people. Not just any people. Light glimmered off more jewelry than... Fuck me. It feels like I'm standing in Aladdin's cave. At least the cathedral didn't fall short of the occasion. A long, cavernous space, the altar fronted directly to the nave with double tiers of seating beneath skylights of frosted opal. The acoustics were phenomenal, and despite the crowd, it felt like he could hear every whisper. There was the sound of Vatica, certainly, but other languages stood out. He was certain he could hear English in the deep bass of Zachariah. The binder can't miss a word in this place. But then it was time. As he stepped to the altar where the binder was waiting, there was a susurrus of approval from the crowd. It was a nice suit. The murmur lasted until he turned. The word for sword in Vatica was mekhabi. Whispered or not, it was on a lot of lips once it was properly in view. Some actually gasped. Suck it up, ladies. I'm not in uniform, so this is what you get. Maybe it wasn't diplomatic, but wearing his mess dress hadn't been either. As for the blade that killed Admiral Tejo, I don't know who you party crashers are, but it's not like she didn't gut me like a carp. If I lived with it, you can too. And the sword was magnificent. The Zuba depicted a forest set in gleaming gold and silver, while the glossy chocolate-brown sire shone on his hip. If the trappings were something a Shovanti could appreciate, the sword itself was a marvel, and it didn't belong in the back of a closet. Not like I'm waving you at these folks, but Ganya would never put you back on display. If she had any doubts, this crowd would seal the deal. You don't belong locked up in a box. And I'm standing here talking to a sword. But it wasn't a Marlon Perkins kind of moment, and his unease vanished when the binder winked at him. It wasn't a saucy kind of wink. The priestess was a devout woman, warm and accommodating to Maver's request on such short notice. The wink was maternal. You're not the first nervous man I've seen, and you won't be the last kind of wink. It helped, and after what seemed the appropriate time to appreciate the groom, Solani, Maver, and Shalea were there. Solani stepped forward, her uniform immaculate. If the sword on his hip gleamed, her breastplate shone. Her full dress uniform covered everything, save for one hand, and the physiotherapy had worked wonders. She stepped to the altar evenly, and her smile was like sunlight. Okay, got to love a girl in uniform. Miv and Leia flanked her, dressed in the colours of House Pelavon, and all three wore silver bracelets. It was Jrafel's day, and the bracelets symbolised their mutual union. At least I can take off the bloody wreath soon. The florist had made it for a Shovanti man, and the tiny thing kept threatening to fall off. Given their importance, Shovanti marriages tended to be all-day affairs. Small, short, and intimate had been the order for Miv and Leia, but this? If the service remained short, the reception and the ogling were meant to last for hours. It was a testament to a woman achieving something important by finding a man to share her life. If the ceremony was short, the reception ensured everyone knew it. And with a crowd like this, dear God, I hope Badin brought enough food. But it was time. The binder raised her hand for silence, and for a wonder, it took, except for a voice raised in protest.
Ma'am, she's looking at me.
Children? The McClendons and Dasari had brought theirs. Then he remembered Tom Steinberg asking to bring his kids. He hadn't a Dixie wife, and 3 adopted pups? Something for later. After all the texting, they meet at the reception, which at least promised somewhere to hide. If the kids were playing oop, that was fine. Just one of those things you got at weddings, and... Did someone just moan? He blinked. Solani stared. While she grimaced, thankfully the binder kept going. Weddings were important to a Shrivanti, and nothing stopped one. The binder didn't look happy, but the show rolled on. Salani had been a surprise, loving him from a distance, and now soon to be his third Shrivanti wife. Salani was a Lotta woman, even by Shrivanti standards. If anything, the uniform accentuated her physique, and he tried not to feel short. Just roll with it, Tom. Just roll with it. The binder was a priestess, but for Shrivanti, that seemed to be part preacher, part shamaness, and part tattoo artist, since the ceremony began with applying the glyph for the goddess of choice, just above Salani's navel. The glyphs weren't complicated, but a binder who could do one well commanded a lot of respect. That will be fun with the breastplate, and bless you, Jrafel, for not making me do it. One shirtless wedding reception is a lifetime supply. Curtains drew closed. Salani lay down, tucking up the breastplate, and the elderly binder went to work, dipping the ceremonial skewers in the ink and pushing it under her skin. Miv and Leia held her hands, and Salani tried not to wince. For the most part, she pulled it off.
Congratulations, young lady. That's very fine work, if I say so, my...
If the binder looked askance, it wasn't like Tom could blame her, as a long, shuddering moan of release rose like a crescendo through the cathedral. The acoustics were flawless. I don't believe this. Topless dancers for a reception was bad, but this? During my wedding? Tom winced. What next? Terry Garr singing Sweet Mystery of Life?
Let's move on, shall we?
The binder's eyes speared him like gimlets. He shrugged with a "what can I do" expression. The binder looked unconvinced. Lark is filming the whole thing, and given the acoustics, it's been captured for fucking posterity. And the whole audience had to hear it too, Tom thought furiously. This has to be a crime. What counts as blasphemy to the goddess of pleasure? The binder finished packing away her tools, wiping antiseptic over the glyph, and Salani tugged her armor back into place. The amusement on her face spoke volumes. This would become one of those family stories. So, tell me about your wedding. He could hear the question now. Well, hey, we have it all on high-def video. Isn't that great? But the glyph was done, and the curtains drew back. It was time for the ceremony proper. I am Captain Salani Tonnis. Salani's voice rang over the crowd. And I love this man, Thomas Warwick. I vow to Jrafel, the goddess of joy, that as his wife I will always bring joy, love, happiness to him. To keep him in my heart always, and to love him for the rest of my life. I am Thomas Alexander Warwick, he replied, focusing on the moment. They were almost there. I accept your vow to Jrafel. You are now my wife. I will keep you in my heart always, and love you for the rest of my life. The ceremony was still short and sweet, if not private, and he buried the urge to run upstairs with the sword. And wouldn't that be special? The brides will stand and smile while the groom runs amok. But really, it was fine. It was. Honestly. He was there in the moment. Friends, family, a daughter, a patient cannibal, a few hundred strangers who'd wanted him for the buffet. You are now bound to each other as wife, and husband. You are one family and one soul in the eyes of the goddesses. The binder touched each of them in turn before raising her hands high. May the goddess and those gathered here today witness this union. Riala held Levi's and Melody's hands. It didn't feel as tight as the lump in her chest. The ceremony had been beautiful. Nothing like what they shared on Earth, yet she wasn't immune to the magic of the moment. But the moaning all through the service? It had stopped. Finally. But now someone on the upper floor was giggling. 3 or 4, if she had to guess. At least Eli and Solana were accounted for. But the ceremony had been perfect. Everything from a fairy tale, though she never thought of Shul as home anymore. She was here with the man and woman she loved, and that was all that mattered. Joshua and Cassie were behaving themselves. Together with Lagos, they were rapt with attention at the 3 Adixi children just a row away, and the interest seemed mutual. There was only one thing missing, and the goddess knew there'd never be a better time. As the crowd rose to head to the reception hall, she pulled Melody and Levi close. That was beautiful. Melody's eyes glistened as she squeezed Riala's hand. Levi nodded his agreement. Got to admit, they couldn't have picked a nicer place either. I'm so happy for them. Riala returned Melody's squeeze, then turned to face Levi fully. There's something that I've been meaning to talk to you about. Something important. I was going to wait, but this feels like a good moment for it. Mel mentioned you had something on your mind. Levi smiled. Playing it close to your chest, though. What's up? Levi? She took his hands and kissed the back of each of them. I want to have a baby.